Welcome to the whole Megillah. I'm Rabbi David Kaufman, and you may know some of the story, but you haven't heard the whole story until you've heard it here on the whole Megillah. Before we start, we have a disclaimer. The opinions on that you hear on this show are ours and ours alone. They're not reflective of the organizations for which any of the participants of this show today, Mark Finkelstein and I, work. Nor are they reflective of necessarily of the opinions of webcast1live.com. So with that, lots of stuff to talk to today. We haven't had a show for a couple weeks. And the amount of material that we have just to talk about today alone could easily last us a month's worth of shows. And so we're going to kind of touch on a number of different things. There was some very interesting news today that the FBI managed to hack into the terrorist cell phone from San Bernardino, California. You'll remember this is Syed Farouk had an Apple iPhone, and the FBI wanted to have Apple create a backdoor to get into the phone, and Apple said no way, and this was going to end up going to the Supreme Court, and there was a whole big issue about the FBI ordering an American company to violate its own stuff, and what would happen if they created a backdoor? Then everybody would know it's possible. Well, guess what happened? They got through. They found a way to get through, and guess who helped them do it? An Israeli company called Cellbrite.
Yes, which is not particularly surprising, except for the fact that its name, Cellbrite, has been suppressed in a lot of the public announcement about what's happened.
Well, it's interesting, first of all, that the FBI used an Israeli company.
Well, yes, it is.
Right?
Yeah. The undercurrent, though, that there were some lower courts that had split decisions on the legality of breaking into the phone to begin with. And some of these decisions were undercut by the occurrence of time. Certain things happened and certain things were pushed off the table.
I am guessing that this is actually a worst case scenario for Apple. Because what I'm guessing happened here is that Cellbrite took a random Apple iPhone and experimented with how to break into a random Apple iPhone. Yeah. Because you don't want to break into one where you would actually lose the data. So they actually probably figured out a way to break into anybody's iPhone and then applied that to this specific iPhone, and lo and behold, it worked, which now means that no iPhone is safe. Instead of having a specific thing to go after this one phone, which was what the FBI asked, Cellbrite must have come up with something that would get them into any iPhone.
Supposedly, but again, I think we now know the phone model that the fellow from San Bernardino had. I think it's a 5C or something like that. And the contention is that this is not a precedent setter because it only deals with this one phone.
Yeah, but not anymore. That's what I'm saying. If Cellbrite broke into this,
yes.
Cellbrite didn't break into something where Apple sent that phone information to have it download a new update and then open and then unlock, which is what the FBI was asking them to do. Cellbrite must have created something that would allow them to get into any iPhone.
A general hack.
And therefore, you're dealing with essentially unlocking all iPhones instead of just unlocking the one. And I think that's much more significant.
Apple had its opportunity to try to narrow the focus and be a little more compliant. And they chose not to.
The other thing that I would guess is that the FBI didn't go to Cellbrite, that Cellbrite came to them and said, we can do this.
Okay. That could be.
Right? So you end up with something where they probably found a backdoor to get into the cell phones as such, and then said, we can get into any iPhone.
Yes, but it was
imperative. And went to the FBI.
It was imperative that somebody break the code. You don't want hidden information, especially in a criminal case.
Oh, no, it's absolutely true. But, if people were believing that their iPhones could be inaccessible, this Israeli company just proved that no iPhone is inaccessible, that they can get into anything they want. And, of course, this news comes the same day as the Israelis and Chinese are entering into talks over establishing a free trade zone.
Only countries have had a free trade zone with China.
I don't know, but it's certainly not
Canada and the United
Canada
States.
And the U.S.
Yeah.
I mean, there are a number of things now that Israel is establishing with different countries, right? So Israel is having to try to make sure that the volatility in potential volatility in U.S. leadership doesn't affect its standing, and it's having to work not only with the United States, Canada, and Europe, which are its normal partners, but now it's also reaching out to the Chinese, and it's coordinated a number of things with the Russians because of the Northern Front and dealing with Syria and worrying about potential fallout, literally, from what's going on in Syria.
And that has worked to this point, hasn't it, with Russia?
Yeah, I think the Israelis and Russians have really increased cooperation on a lot of different levels, and you now have a huge amount of tourism coming from Russia and Israel. Israel is one of the few places in the world where Russian tourists can go and speak Russian, so they
Absolutely.
can go
away from home.
They can go on the coast.
Yeah,
they have a relative security there. They can speak Russian, and it's a modern country. So evidently, wealthy Russian tourists are flocking to Israel, and that does include the business people who are flocking to Israel. Where you will now have Russian-speaking tech experts in Israel working with Russian-speaking tech experts in Russia, and have these joint Israeli-Russian companies, or companies that are working in the former Soviet Union states also. I would to the Carmel market in Tel Aviv, interacted with one of the salespeople there who was telling me that instead of wanting shekels, which is what I was trying to figure out how much it would cost in shekels for what I wanted to get, he wanted dollars because he was going to Georgia to visit his family, right? And Georgia, not the United States Georgia, but Georgia, the former Soviet Union nation, the country of Georgia.
Right. Now, how long ago did you to travel to Israel?
It's about a month now.
And for what purpose did you go?
That was the Reform Rabbis Conference in Jerusalem.
And how was
in
that?
Israel? It was very interesting. First time I went to Israel where we went on something that wasn't a tourist thing. This was Israeli Israel.
Yeah. So who did you go with? Who are some of the people?
Well, I mean, it's
leadership?
all the leadership of the Reform movement, and then from around the world who came in, not just America, but from Europe and Australia and South America, and then the Israeli rabbis. So there were 400 or something of us when we had the joint session of the Israeli Knesset. I think we talked a little bit about last time, but things in Israel are very interesting. There are a lot of that it's not a separation barrier between Israel and the West Bank they needed, but it's a separation barrier between Tel Aviv and Jerusalem.
Yeah.
Because the country is so divided between Tel Aviv and Jerusalem, between
of course,
between kind of the progressive secular left and the conservative religious right.
Yeah.
That they would probably vote overwhelmingly in favor of such a barrier at this point. And you see these things in discussions. There was some discussion about the possibility of new peace talks coming about, and we had heard that the president was going to be coming, and some negotiations talk. And one of the things that happened just a couple weeks ago is that Mahmoud Abbas rejected the peace initiative proposed by Vice President Biden. So we're dealing with a situation now where it's not just a matter of whether or not the Israeli government is willing to make certain concessions. It's a matter of whether or not the Palestinian Authority is even willing to engage in the negotiations. The Palestinian Authority, instead of engaging in negotiations and accepting the peace proposal offered by the United States, decided that it wanted to enter into guns on a way to bring the government together. This is while Hamas is aiding the Islamic State operating out of Gaza into the Sinai Peninsula. This is while you have the Palestinian Authority's supposed ally in the Egyptian government and Saudi Arabia both opposed to us, and the Palestinian Authority wants to work with Hamas. Doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. So I'm not sure about the strategic position.
I did not take kindly to this.
Oh, I mean, just very well. There have been a few things that have gone on just in a row that have made Vice President Biden and President Obama, for that matter, very angry. I mean, one, not accepting what the United States thought were very reasonable, even generous assumption of the basic terms of the peace agreement. But then the fact that on top of that, you had the stabbing of Taylor Force, the murder of Taylor Force, an American hero, veteran of the Afghanistan and Iraq wars, killed by a Palestinian terrorist while walking with his wife as a student from Vanderbilt University on a student program in Israel. And Vice President Biden, when he spoke at AIPAC, was angry. I mean, it was very, very angry at the Palestinian leadership. They didn't even condemn the attack. They lauded the terrorists. They acted as if Taylor Force, an American hero citizen, was a killer enemy of Palestinian people. That's how they responded to it. Vice President Biden was furious about that. And I think the United States government has basically, from the president's side, basically written off the Palestinian leadership for the foreseeable future as possible partners in engaging in the peace process, in any kind of peace process because of this. If you can't even condemn that,
yes,
and you're praising teenagers who go and trying to stab Israeli soldiers and getting killed over it, you're essentially using them as soldiers. You're sending them after American citizens. I mean, this is ugly stuff. Even Turkey has realized that it needed to abandon that position, and Turkey's been really hostile lately. But even Turkey is trying to work with Israel now in stopping the terrorism because this is destroying the Turkish economy.
You know, the question of the continuing terrorism, probably something like 30 people have been stabbed or killed since October. It's ongoing attrition. We've seen other periods of attrition where the objective simply was to make life unbearable for the Jews. I think that's the stated objective.
And somebody pointed this out, is that even the afternoon after Taylor Force was killed and 11 other people were injured on the Jaffa boardwalk, people were out acting as if it was absolutely normal. The Israelis have basically decided this stuff is going to happen randomly, and they need to simply compensate. They need to just go on with their lives. They can't stop doing what they're doing. You have a heightened state of security where there are more police officers around, more soldiers around on a regular basis, but they don't change what they're doing in order to accommodate that. On the other hand, when you have big things happen, like you've been seeing happen in Turkey, like you saw in Brussels,
yes,
those change the fundamental nature of what not only cities but in the countries. there was a statement today, Brussels will never be the same because the security that's now required with a large Muslim population there that is significantly at odds, particularly with the normal population of Belgium, with assumptions that on the population and certainly on the security that anybody who is a Muslim is a potential terrorist. The situation right now involves a very high level of discrimination, and it's necessary in the average person's mindset because of the threat of terrorism. They have people on the loose. They know they have potentially dozens of other followers of ISIS who are even veterans of fighting in Syria who are operating operating in Istanbul now and other places in Turkey. And they're a threat to anybody in the country. They're a threat to go after tourists, American tourists, Israeli tourists, European tourists, or to go after average Turks.
And that's a major cultural shift because nobody wants to live like that. And it's been terribly disruptive, obviously, and will continue to do so until they find a way to at least normalize the relations again.
Well, and the Turks were under the assumption that the Sunnis would treat them as an ally.
Yes.
Right? And they were wrong. This is the biggest problem the Turks have run into is that they kept saying, we're fighting the Kurds, they're fighting the Kurds on the same side. They're not fans of the United States, they're not fans of the United States, we're on the same side. They're not fans of Israel, we're not fans of Israel, we're on the same side.
But ISIS doesn't work like that.
And they're not working like that. Yeah. And so what you're seeing is the Turks are supporters of the Muslim Brotherhood. Brotherhood is really the origin of the more radical groups, the Al-Qaeda and others who are offshoot of that. And the Islamic State is essentially an offshoot of Al-Qaeda, which is what Jonathan Spire was mentioning today. You're dealing with a situation that Turkey was incapable of handling. Europe is incapable of handling it, and how they're going to deal with this situation moving forward, I think, is going to be telling for European life going forward for the foreseeable future, I think. Yeah. Anyway, with that, we'll take a short break. When we get back, we're going to talk a little bit more about the American-Israel Public Affairs Committee Policy Conference in Washington, D.C., and the various speeches, including Donald Trump's.
Credit cards are like grandkids. They love you, sometimes get out of control, and it's fun to get a new one. Who can stop them from piling on?
Hi, I'm Tom Coates with Consumer Credit of Des Moines. At the end of the day, you can return the grandkids, but you're stuck paying off bad credit card debt. We'll help you put the fun back into using credit cards responsibly. Right, kids?
Yeah! If you need help getting credit cards off your back, call Consumer Credit of Des Moines.
Hi, my name is David Burrier, your Hope Coach. I host a live weekly talk show called I've Been There every Thursday afternoon at 5:30, right here on webcast1live.com, and on my weekly radio program Saturday mornings at 10 on Truth Network 99.3 FM. Human everyday people who have survived incredible life challenges and who testify to God's faithfulness in the midst of their storms. So join me as we bring a message of hope and encouragement. Everybody needs hope. I know, because I've been there.
'em. 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 '
pizza, and it's got Graziano sausage.
Rock and Prevention is celebrating 25 years of creating a caring community. We want to say thank you to the tens of thousands of Rock High School mentors that have carried our message of health, love, and encouragement to over 1.5 million children, teachers, and parents. Our mentors teach children methods and skills to prevent bullying and drug use. Thank you to all the school administrators, teachers, and counselors for their opportunity to serve you. Rock on, fair citizens, rock on! This is Pat McManus for Rock and Prevention, the Richard O. Jacobson Foundation, and this station.
From the RE/MAX Real Estate Concept Studios, this is Webcast One Live.
The whole Megillah with Rabbi David Kaufman and Mark Finkelstein. Once again, the opinions expressed on this show are ours and ours alone. They don't represent either Webcast One Live or the organizations that we work for.
It sounds like the Maliazzi brothers.
Yeah, we always have to say that. Now, Mark, we were talking about when we went to break. The American Israel Public Affairs Committee Policy Conference we just got back from, which was an interesting conference.
Well, first of all, it was huge. It was the largest ever of its conferences, with something like 18,732 people, of which 4,000 were college students. That's correct. Who else was there?
Well, so there were 4,000 college students. I don't know what the number was of Christian evangelicals who were there, African-American church members, Hispanic, Latino church members. Had some interesting conversations with various ministers who were there. And what I would say is, while you still have a broad swath of the American Jewish community, maybe not including the far right, kind of boycott AIPAC for various reasons. The far right doesn't like the fact that AIPAC deals with the administration, deals with progressives, and supports a two-state solution. The far left is not happy with AIPAC because it works with the Israeli government and deals with evangelicals. So you're missing kind of both far wings of the American Jewish community. But you have a Jewish community and an organization at its heart is really a Democrat-dominated organization that has reached out to a significant number of Republicans, especially Christian evangelicals, and now is essentially a organization significantly representative of the pro-Israel community in the United States, not the pro-Israel Jewish community in the United States, but the pro-Israel community as such.
As it should be. Because it's not necessarily intended simply to be a Jewish organization.
Yeah, I mean, it's a bipartisan, nonpartisan organization that's singularly focused on the Israel relationship. And this made it very interesting when we had speakers come to speak to the conference, because every speaker that came, no matter whether it was Vice President Biden, Hillary Clinton, or any of the Republican candidates, all got ovations. All were received well, and this caused some problems because some people were hoping that at least one of the candidates, if not two of the candidates, would not be well received by the policy conference, by the attendees. And that didn't happen.
Well, right? Part of that was because AIPAC itself had taken great pains over a several-day period to emphasize almost in every workshop, we are cordial to our guests.
Yeah, I mean, so you have this this idea that you don't boo.
That's right. You don't boo.
You sit silently if somebody is saying something you don't like, and the idea that you were going to have people getting up and walking out on Donald Trump or booing loudly at Donald Trump while he was there. And this is somebody who could be the Republican nominee for president, would essentially put the organization at odds with the Republican Party, which is not something that the organization would be able to deal with. What ended up happening, of course, is that Donald Trump spoke in such a way that it threatened to put the policy conference attendees at odds with the president and the Democratic Party.
And with the organization itself.
Well, yeah, I mean, with a significant portion of the organization. But the reality is, the beginning of this conference, you had a wonderful speech by Vice President Joe Biden, who got multiple ovations, delivered a wonderful speech. It was from the political left to the political left, talking to Democrats, essentially, the administration's supporters, about the administration's policies. He was not talking to right-wing evangelicals.
No, it was criticism. He melded it in pretty adeptly. And within that particular speech, he changed his tone several different times.
Well, and he mentioned a couple different things that I think are very important to note. First thing, he talked about Taylor Force. He talked about the murder of Taylor Force, and that's what he called it. He called it a murder of an American hero.
Yes.
Right? I mean, that's what he said. And he was really upset that President Abbas refused to condemn that. He also mentioned the fact that his family was there. He was there with his granddaughters, who he brought to Israel, just as he did his son Bo when he was younger, and he teared up when he talked about Bo.
Absolutely.
And he mentioned that his wife and his granddaughters were only about a half mile away from where the stabbing was. He was only a mile away, meeting at the Peres Center with Shimon Peres. And then he talked about the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement.
And he was very explicit. He said, it's wrong, it's wrong, it's wrong. That's what he said. And the fact that he reiterated it so many times, it was a totally emotional speech from beginning to end. But he understood that it was appropriate to make their position clear. And even today, besides Biden, the American ambassador to Israel, Dan Shapiro, basically said the same thing. What did Shapiro basically say today?
Let me find the article. Let me find the article, Mark, on the BDS from the administration here.
Okay, I didn't mean to do it.
You got me set up looking for the article on the administration, and I can't say it. So, no, I mean, so Shapiro said. He rebuked the boycott, divestment, sanctions movement and stated clearly that the U.S. government strongly opposes its activities. The United States of America vigorously opposes efforts to isolate or boycott Israel. We've demonstrated this commitment for decades and continue to devote substantial resources in our government to this fight. We consider it an extension of our longstanding commitment to fight any effort to delegitimize Israel. The U.S. government is actively taking measures to undermine BDS, which I found interesting. We lead what could be called a counter-boycott, demonstrating through our actions that we seek the opposite of boycotts. We seek to make our economic ties with Israel stronger each passing year. He says, we know that the BDS movement is not disconnected from the pernicious and persistent evil of anti-Semitism, which continues to rear its ugly head and is on the rise in too many parts of the world. He talked about the fact that we see swastikas in different parts of the world and different things targeting Jews and targeting Jewish institutions. And he also said, our policy is not merely limited to rhetoric. Our opposition is not rhetorical. We have demonstrated this commitment for decades. In the Commerce Department, for example, we have a dedicated team of boycott busters to ensure that American companies comply with their legal obligations to report the receipt of boycott requests and to refuse to take actions that would restrict trade with Israel.
Well, this is the most definitive statement that's come out from the American administration.
It's an interesting statement because it's even stronger than the anti-boycott, divestment, sanctions proposals at the state level. I mean, they're actually saying if somebody asks you to boycott, you need to report it.
Yeah, yeah. And this topic, basically, in various aspects, permeated more than many other topics of the AIPAC conference this year.
Yeah, we heard a lot about it. And I think part of that is because there's no peace process. So the situation we've got right now is one in which the discussions really are focused on the boycott, divestment, sanctions efforts, because the primary efforts that are ongoing between the Palestinians and Israelis right now are the stabbing efforts, the stabbing intifada, which we heard a lot about, and the boycott, divestment, sanctions movement, which is trying to exploit American college campuses and European college campuses against Israelis. That's the primary purpose of it. And a secondary purpose of it is to exploit fraudsters who are trying to harm American companies doing business with Israel. Right? I mean, I think that's really what we saw.
Yeah, it's certainly a broad spectrum of how BDS interacts with normal relations on campuses. And as you want to venture into the UC?
Sure. I mean, you want to talk a little bit about it? This is the article on the UC stuff.
Yeah, just in general, certainly the University of California has seen a spate of what we would identify as anti-Semitism over the past number of years. And therefore, students and faculty and alumni and others have weighed in asking the University of California to consider the pernicious effect of anti-Semitism on the college campus, as UC itself was promulgating some sort of guideline with dealing with tolerance per se.
Well, and what ends up happening in a lot of campuses is that the purpose of Apartheid Week, for example, is to make Jews feel uncomfortable on campus. It's not, in fact, it's to make everybody feel uncomfortable, but Jews in particular. And most campuses have policies designed to avoid that, right?
Because it goes beyond criticism.
Right. You would not have a space on campus dedicated to making African Americans feel uncomfortable or dedicated to making LGBT feel uncomfortable.
Definitely not.
So why is it okay to have a space dedicated on campus dedicated to making Jews feel uncomfortable?
Unfortunately, this is pillared on two pillars. The one is their definition of what anti-Semitism is or isn't, and the second is the free speech issue. Now, the free speech issue should not interfere with the expression of any political opinion, but when you go and then you demonize individuals, it crosses over into anti-Semitism. And certainly, where is that demonization? When you consider calling Israel a genocidal state or an apartheid state, that's illegitimate type of criticism that should be acknowledged and rebuked.
Yeah, I mean, it's not even just that. It's that in a lot of these movements actually end up targeting Israel activists and saying that they're responsible for the deaths of people on Palestinian children, and they use blood libels against the Jewish students on campus. Sometimes they will act even much more strongly and put up Nazi signs and things like that. And usually when we have these kind of protests in large numbers, especially when they're backed by faculty members, which they are at many campuses, you end up with some pretty ugly events against Jews or against Israeli speakers. It's a fairly regular occurrence.
So it was a very difficult task for the regents of the University of California to put together a report and then to try to pass the report with the imprimatur of the Board of Regents itself, which they did.
Yeah, I mean, so here's an article from Gates One Institute, did a kind of an extensive review here, and it says, we'll get there in a second, that the California university system seems to have been the dubious distinction of being the epicenter of campus war against Israel. We'll talk about it more when we get back from this break.
Northern Lights Pizza's amazing garlic butter makes a now available in 12-ounce bottles at Northern Lights, Hy-Vee, and Graziano's.
Northern Lights Pizza.
I'm Brian Leach, owner of Service Legend, and my position is Chief Talent Officer.
I'm Nicholas Wonderscheid.
I am Bernie Hobbs.
And I'm the Service Manager.
Marketing Director and Client Relations Manager.
Everything that we do is about ensuring that we exceed your expectations.
Our clients are important to us. 100% satisfaction.
We're not just focused on heating and cooling. That's the easiest part of our job, actually, is fixing furnaces and air conditioners.
Everyone that we come in touch with, we want to improve lives.
Bottom line is, we've got our installation guarantees, 25% energy savings guarantee, comfort guarantee, temperature selection guarantee, property protection guarantee.
100% satisfaction guaranteed, fixed rate or it's free.
All of those guarantees are backed up with a 100% money back guarantee to hold ourselves accountable to making sure that you get what you're after.
Just fixing the problem today. If they have another problem 5 days down the road, it's still fixed rate or it's free.
We use what's called straightforward pricing. Our technicians are going to give you an exact to-the-penny price on what it's going to take before they move forward with any repair. That way you know what to expect.
It's the same price every day.
No surprises.
If you get off work at 5 o'clock in the afternoon, you come home, you realize that, oh, my furnace is broken. Now you need to call somebody out that night. You shouldn't have to pay more for that.
We're guaranteeing service 24/7.
We run afternoons, evenings, nights, weekends. We're staffed to work that.
Phone rings at 3 in the morning, you'll get every time.
We're not sending you out to Timbuktu in some call center. It's our Service Legend team members, our mission control team.
I'll take a call anytime.
And then they answer the phones the same way during the day as they do at night.
It's a great day at your service company. How can we make you smile?
That's the only way to provide true 24-hour service.
When you're able to let somebody actually live in their home safely when they weren't able to do that before, where they don't have to stay up at night and worry about, is the heat going to come back on? Are we going to freeze the pipes? Is the baby in the room next door going to be sick because they got too cold? When you're able to help somebody overcome challenges like that, that's impacting a life. That makes a difference. I get goosebumps thinking about it.
I love the team. I love the people that I work with.
We have fun, but we work hard.
I call them my ambassadors of legendary service. If you could just envision what that is, that's who we're sending to your home.
They literally will call in, pick up the phone and call and say, hey, I want to talk to your manager. And I get on the phone, they're like, that technician that was at my house was the greatest technician ever. That's cool to me.
We want to brighten people's days.
Every person that we have going into the house has gone through an extensive background check.
Drug testing, we have a very thorough interview process that 1 out of 140 people make it through.
If we promise you something, that's what you're going to get, no matter what.
We're here when you need us to protect the safety and comfort of your family.
If you're not happy, we're going to make it right.
If we're willing to put a 100% money back guarantee on what we do, what type of work do you think we do?
Give us a call. We're there for you 24/7, 365 days a year.
Enough said.
Shalom! Welcome back to the whole Megillah. I'm Rabbi David Kaufman. I'm joined in the studio by Mark Finkelstein. And we were talking about boycott, divestment, and sanctions as kind of the major topic at the AIPAC policy conference. And I think really before we get much more into the BDS, let's talk a little bit more about the policy conference. We had Vice President Biden speak.
Yes.
Who's been coming to policy conferences for 37 years or something like that.
Yes.
We had the opposition leader of Israel speak, Bougie Herzog. What did you think of Herzog's speech?
I think it was tremendous. I think he has a very attenuated personality, which probably makes him not as particularly vibrant to Israelis, but he's a level-headed guy, and he basically says certain things have to be done to push the process forward.
Right. So AIPAC was true to its bipartisan status. It had the opposition leader of Israel and it had the prime minister of Israel both speak. The opposition leader spoke in person, and the prime minister of Israel spoke via video on the Tuesday morning.
And even more than that, the fact is there was David Horowitz who interviewed Bougie Herzog, which meant that Herzog could not give a cut and dried speech, he had to respond to questions.
And he had to respond from questions from the from the editor of an Israeli online newspaper.
That's right.
So it's not even just, it wouldn't be like as if an American had asked the questions. Herzog could have replied in Hebrew, and Horovitz still would have understood what he had to say and translated it. So, so there was that. Monday morning, you had was allotted for the Democrats. Hillary Clinton was the only Democrat who came, the only Democratic presidential candidate who came. So she gave kind of the key speech on Monday morning. And then Monday night was for the Republican candidates. And you had John Kasich, Paul Ryan, who's not a candidate, but he spoke as Speaker of the House. And also then Donald Trump and Ted Cruz spoke after that. And, of course, all the focus was on Donald Trump, just like pretty much all the focus has been on Donald Trump for months now, regardless of anything that he's done. And, you know, to be honest, while I think it was reasonable for extra attention to be paid to Trump in this environment and to talk about how this particular crowd might have responded to him, I think everything Donald Trump does is blown out of proportion, to be honest, at this point. I think that he's getting way undue press attention. Somebody was mentioning that he's gotten hundreds of millions of dollars worth of free press, it's more than anybody else, like hundreds of millions of dollars more.
Earned media, it's called. But you would agree, I suppose, that Hillary Clinton got the greatest ovation?
I think Hillary Clinton got the greatest ovation by far. And I think that what ends up happening at a lot of these programs is, especially when you divide it, Democrats and Republicans, is that a lot of the Republicans didn't show up for Hillary's speech because they either don't like Hillary or they didn't like Bougie Herzog or they didn't want to deal with either one of them, and that was that morning. And on the other hand, in the evening, a lot of the Democrats and progressives didn't come to hear the Republican speeches. So you had a crowd that was predisposed, even more so than normal, to cheer on the Republican candidates and their policy position.
Now, I don't begrudge anybody for missing anybody's particular speech. At the same time, the organization's leadership is thoroughly bipartisan. And it's of a different mentality than the average person. The average person at the AIPAC conference is usually somebody's uncle or aunt or young cousin. And they aren't particularly well versed in these topics. They have feelings, of course, but those feelings are enhanced by the knowledge that people pick up at the conference itself.
There are so many different opportunities to learn at the conference.
Absolutely.
And
they make an impact on a person's ability to synthesize complex information.
And the way that AIPAC Policy Conference works is that you essentially clap for the things you agree with, and you don't clap for the things you don't agree with. So that when you're dealing with different speakers, everybody gets some applause for saying things like, we support a strong relationship with Israel, or we want to support defense assistance to Israel, or we want to...
the meat and potato issues.
We think that Jerusalem is the eternal capital of the Jewish people, right? Yeah. These things tend to get applause because the crowd wants to support those issues. And you end up with problems if the crowd doesn't respond appropriately. And one of my concerns to having people not respond to Donald Trump at all, actually, which was what I was planning on doing, and I did actually, was what happens when he says something that the average person in the crowd for sure supports. Would people stay silent through that as if they didn't agree, which is a problem? Or would it be assumed that people weren't staying silent because they didn't agree with Donald Trump or wanted to make some demonstration against Donald Trump? That's problematic. So what ended up happening was a number of the people decided to say things that Donald Trump said that he agreed with.
And the fact is, those same things were articulated essentially by all the candidates who spoke.
With the exception of the more personal attacks, the more direct attacks on the president.
I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the meat and potato issues.
Yeah.
Because I'm pretty sure that all the candidates had access to the basic foundational points that part of AIPAC, and had people write speeches consistent with those talking points.
Yeah, I mean, and so when Donald Trump came out, most of the people in the crowd, I think, stayed relatively quiet. He got far less applause than any of the other candidates when he was announced. And as he got going and as he started talking about things that people agreed with, the applause got greater and greater. There was some concern about his direct attacks against the president and saying that the president was awful for Israel and on all this stuff. I would imagine that if Hillary Clinton said something about George Bush being that way, you probably would have had a big ovation for that too, because the Democrats, many of the Democrats, would have cheered that. So the difference really was that Donald Trump engaged in ad hominem attacks instead of just dealing with policy. And I think if he'd stayed just on the policy, people would have cheered more appropriately. And the cheers for ad hominem attacks really were partisan. And there's a lot of partisan divide in this country right now. There's a lot of partisan division and anger. And so when he hit those
points,
notes, he got response.
And all the candidates, with possibly one exception, know how to manipulate the crowd, manipulate their voice. Even Joe Biden did that. That is, in certain sections where he wanted to be very serious, he got very quiet. And then he ramped up the rhetoric by raising his voice and repeating things. And it's basically a symbol for the people who agree with the idea to start an ovation and to maintain it.
Yeah, I mean, Ted Cruz had a pretty tired crowd by the time he spoke, so I don't think it was really fair. The other candidates, the one exception was John Kasich, who I think just kind of read through his speech and did it too quickly. But everybody else, I think, knows really how to work a crowd. Hillary Clinton is an excellent speaker. I think Paul Ryan is an excellent speaker.
Right.
And I got to say it. I mean, Donald Trump's ability to manipulate a crowd and to get the crowd going was at a frighteningly high level. He is able to get people to respond to what he wants to say. So with that, we're going to take a short break, and then we're going to go to the end when we get back.
From the RE/MAX Real Estate Concept Studios, this is Webcast One Live.
Credit cards are like grandkids. They love you, sometimes get out of control, and it's fun to get a new one. Who can stop them from piling on?
Hi, I'm Tom Coates with Consumer Credit of Des Moines. At the end of the day, you can return the grandkids, but you're stuck paying off bad credit card debt. We'll help you put the fun back into using credit cards responsibly. Right, kids?
Yeah! If you need help getting credit cards off your back, call Consumer Credit of Des Moines.
Rockton Prevention is celebrating 25 years of creating a caring community. We want to say thank you to the tens of thousands of Rock High School mentors that have carried our message of health, love, and encouragement to over 1.5 million children, teachers, and parents. Our mentors teach children methods and skills to prevent bullying and drug use. Thank you to all the school administrators, teachers, and counselors for their opportunity to serve you. Rock on, fair citizens, rock on! This is Pat McManus for Rockton Prevention, the Richard O. Jacobson Foundation, and this station.
Northern Lights Pizza, your home of the tasty crust. Our garlic butter sauce now available in 12-ounce bottles at Northern Lights, Hy-Vee, and Graziano's.
Northern Lights Pizza.
Hi, my name is David Burrier, your Hope Coach. I host a live weekly talk show called I've Been There every Thursday afternoon at 5:30, right here on webcast1live.com, and on my weekly radio program Saturday mornings at 10 on Truth Network 99.3 FM. I interview common, everyday people who have survived incredible life challenges and who testify to God's faithfulness in the midst of their storms. So join me as we bring a message of hope and encouragement. Everybody needs hope. I know, because I've been there.
From the RE/MAX Real Estate Concept Studios, this is Webcast One Live.
Shalom. Welcome back to the whole Megillah. I'm Rabbi David Kaufman. I'm joined in the studio by Mark Finkelstein, and we were talking about the AIPAC policy conference, and I was noting the fact that there's a pretty big division, depending on which candidate it was, they were cheered essentially by a different portion of the audience. Even some of the things that they said that I think were universally acceptable.
Yes, there was some overlap for sure.
But there's a lot of division. Now, there's not quite as much division as there is in Israel, and their governing body. And there was an event this week that I think really showed a lot of that, and it's going to be discussed, I think, going forward, ongoing right now, or whether or not to bring charges against an Israeli soldier who shot a Palestinian who had been arrested and was lying on the ground, shot him in the head and killed him. And there's some argument as to whether or not the soldier thought the person might have had a bomb vest. The Israeli Defense Force leadership say, we already searched him. We know he didn't have a bomb vest. And
at the same time, other people said that he wasn't searched.
It's really interesting. You had the medical personnel who I think showed up later, said that he wasn't searched, but I think the commander on the spot had already done it, and that's so. There may be some possibility of a reduced sentence. I think reduced charges based on some ambiguity here. But this soldier who actually shot the terrorist who had done a stabbing. Came onto the scene, I think, something like 10 minutes after the event. I mean, he didn't come onto the scene 10 seconds after the event. This was somebody, the soldiers were standing around, getting ready to do whatever else they do to take somebody into custody when this one soldier just walked up and shot this person. And in the meantime, you had media around, you had groups recording what was going on. So this became a big media sensation. Actually, prior to the publication of the video evidence, the Israeli army had already charged this soldier with murder and arrested him.
Which is quite an interesting thing that is not usually brought up.
It's not usually brought up. The Israelis immediately responded. Now, what is interesting here is that there's a firestorm of criticism in Israel against the army leadership, against the IDF, trying to say, how could you possibly arrest this person for doing this? It's going to endanger our soldiers. It's going to make sure that they don't feel like they're supported. It doesn't go along with policy. I mean, and this is on top of the fact that you had people who were cheering the execution, functionally is what this was, and you've had people, Israeli leaders, who've argued that they should simply execute these terrorists and not bring them to trial at all. So the question is, was this soldier acting on this kind of an idea that this terrorist shouldn't have been allowed to live, and therefore chose to take matters into his own hands rather than to allow the system to function? That seems to be what happened. And then after the fact, after they filed charges, now somebody's coming to his defense saying that this was because he thought there was potentially a bomb vest involved, when we're dealing with minutes after the situation. And it's ugly in Israel right now. You had 1,000 people protesting on behalf of the soldier today. You have members of the Knesset coming out and condemning the coalition government, condemning Likud, condemning the IDF leadership for charging this soldier at all. It's ugly.
Well, the fact is, when anybody fires a weapon, there are regulations in the IDF that govern how you do so and who is accountable for that. And I'm pretty sure that the soldiers are told quite specifically they are accountable for the use of their weapons. It comes with the nature of the IDF, which prides itself in having this purity of arms, of values. And, you know, when I heard, for instance, on the BBC, Peter Lerner, who is a spokesperson for probably the IDF, said definitely this individual superseded the regulations, and what he did was wrong.
Well, and we also have an interesting thing here that the medical forces who were on the scene evidently treated the mildly wounded soldier before treating the more significantly wounded Palestinian to begin with, and they're being criticized for that. And there have been other cases where this has been the case. And because the Israeli policy is to treat the most severely wounded first, whether it's attacker or the victim.
I suppose.
And the IDF Medical Corps oath simply requires medical personnel to provide treatment for victims and attackers alike. There have been a number of cases where it's been hard to tell who's who. And they've mistaken victims for attackers in different situations, or people who were innocent bystanders were attacked because somebody else thought they were the attacker. Things get pretty ugly when you're dealing with fear, right? And we're dealing with fear in our environment too. You're dealing with fear in the Israeli environment, and there are people who are trying to excuse actions based on discrimination, fear, and kind of overreaction to all of that at the same time. So,
in addition, there are people who want to stigmatize the Israeli army as well. So there are repercussions on both sides of these issues, and from the human rights community who don't like the idea that Israel is a functioning army, for crying out loud.
Yeah, I mean, so the fact that the Israeli army immediately charged this person is largely sliding by the media, but it's very significant. In fact, they didn't even they charged him and are having hearings much faster than the United States government would in similar circumstances, I think.
Yes.
You know, how it'll turn out, I don't know, because if you have witnesses who are offering contrary testimony, look, anytime you have a legal system, you're going to have that situation.
Yeah.
So they may not be able to charge him with murder like they originally wanted. They may end up charging it with manslaughter and saying you didn't follow regulations, and charging it with not following regulations and not dealing with his commanders instead of deliberately killing somebody. It may be something along those lines, simply because they don't have enough evidence to do something else.
And the fact that this young fellow essentially was a terrorist.
He was a terrorist.
And we've seen many cases where people seem to excuse the terrorist incident and only look at the repercussions from Israel afterwards.
Yeah, it is very clear that coverage of these kind of events ends up trying to make the Palestinian attacker look like they're not a problem. Instead of having the attackers portrayed as attempted murderers, they are often portrayed as somehow heroic. The Israelis who defend themselves and save people from these attackers are somehow portrayed as monsters. You had the Time magazine article where it treated a terrorist as if he was a victim. You know, it gets really, really messy. You know, part of why we do this show is to try to clarify some of these issues so that you are not dealing with just having to deal with whatever the media puts out there, because there's so much more nuance to the show. That's part of why we talk, and to the story. That's part of why I talk about this being the whole Megillah. You may know some of the story because it's presented to you in the media, but you don't know the whole story because you don't have all the background and all the nuance that's going on that affects the situation so that you can make an accurate determination of what's really going on. That's why we call this show the whole Megillah. That's why we do this show. It's important for people to understand what's going on. It's why I teach classes. It's why we reach out. It's why we have Jewish community relations councils. So as we talk more about these situations in the Middle East and as we go forward in the weeks ahead, remember that on the whole Megillah, you'll get the whole story and not just part of it. We hope you'll tune in the weeks ahead. Have a good week.